All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for the third session of Change powered by Parbery. So today we're going to start looking at planning the change. Before we get started, though, I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd especially like to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are here today with us. So just as a bit of a recap, within Parbery we have an extended team of change practitioners. We have Kim, who is unfortunately unwell today and unable to join us. Kim is the partner responsible for the overall management practice within Parbery, and then we have Michelle Weeks and myself, who are both principals as part of Parbery. And also today we're joined by a very special guest, Taylor, one of our change practitioners within the change team. So Taylor and I are going to be doing a little bit of a show for you today. So hope you enjoy it. So just as a bit of a recap and where we are today on the journey. So we've already stepped through in the two previous sessions, assessing the change and scoping the change. So today we're going to be looking at the planning of the change. So this is really the critical component of your change program, and it's really set up to do that detailed work, to align the change activities, whether that be communications, leadership, coaching, your communications, your training, etc., with the overall project plan. It can be in a waterfall context, or it can be in an agile context. But essentially what we're going to be looking at is, the change plan, communications plan. We're potentially going to be doing things like user persona creation, if we want a little bit more understanding around what the UX experience might look like. How we're going to engage with our stakeholders throughout the journey, and what is the plan that we need for that. Things like sponsorship roadmap as well. We've talked a lot about our leader-led change already. Now, if we want our leaders to be, upfront and visible, pretty important that we produce a plan for them to get them on the journey with us. And that goes into our leadership support planning, and obviously we'll be doing things like learning needs analysis, and potentially looking, or performance needs analysis if you're in defence these days, and looking at what those gaps are and the needs are for our customers. So that's where we are today. So just as a bit of a recap, so a bit of a refresher, we've talked about when we're scoping the change, some of the things we need to consider around the organisational context of what we're introducing, and what that might look like. Obviously, depending on organisational cultures, the previous experience with people within the organisation. Previous leadership beliefs. Sometimes you can have leaders which might not want to change as well. So you can have challenging environments across the board. Really, what we want to do when we're doing our planning is we want to take all of that stuff into consideration. So we've said a lot around being evidence-based and data-led. So I quite like this as a bit of an equation. Just as a rule of thumb, where you can turn around and say, well, if I want to take in all of the various different components that we've talked about, from the functional components of the change, the organisational elasticity, and some of the cultural components, how motivated people are to change, we can put all that together and to say, there's a series of those events that when we map them out, what we'll get is essentially an indication of the implementation effectiveness, or the potential effectiveness that we think we're going to achieve. This is an opportunity then to benchmark what we think we can achieve, and set that expectation, and then obviously we're going to plan accordingly. So before I go on any further with that, any questions? Perfect. So one of the things that I think is really important from a change management perspective is that we actually accurately and coherently I guess, identify what our change milestone is. So a change milestone can be very different to a project milestone, in that project milestones typically look at things like, when is a piece of technology going to be available? When is an organizational structure going to be published? When is they tend to look at more the stuff or things that the project are going to deliver, whereas a change milestone is actually, what day do we actually change the way somebody does their job? And there can be multiple change milestones within a single project, or there could only be a single change milestone in a whole portfolio of projects. There might be many different technology changes and infrastructure changes and various other things that need to occur in order to enable us to actually change the way people are working. As change managers, obviously that's our primary focus. When do people need to be ready to do their job in a new way? And getting clarity around those activities are really important. So we're going to talk a bit today about identifying our change milestones and the importance of it. But if you are planning a change initiative, really important thing to be able to delve down into is, when do we actually materially impact the way people change? So overlaying that onto what a traditional project plan would look like versus what do we do as changes. So again, we've used our initiate, develop, implement, evaluate, review standard, 2-pass process that we're pretty familiar with in federal government and defence. And what a project would normally do, is at the beginning of the initiate phase, they're going to be looking at what resources they're going to need. They're going to be scoping the project up. And as we talked through in the previous sessions, at this particular initiate phase, we're going to be doing our high-level assessment. How big do we think the change is? How many people are going to be impacted? Doing that scale and complexity work. The next thing the project will be looking at is they'll be designing their solution, right? So they'll be going through, and you'll have your IT architects, or you'll have whoever it might be, looking at what does that change look like from a technical perspective, or from an organisational perspective, or whatever it might be. From the change perspective, what we're going to be looking at that particular point in time is, where are the pain points? What is it that's actually going to be of benefit to the users? And how do we leverage that? So that's tying back into that WIFM concept, or what's in it for me. Through the development phase, they're going to be, the project is going to be looking more around, are we on build? Are we on quality? Are we delivering the components that we need to? Whereas what we're going to be doing as changes at that particular phase of the project is building those deep relationships, delving in and understanding what it is that's changing, and building all of those plans and artifacts that we talked about. And we can build those change plans in multiple levels. So that list of artifacts I talked through, they could all be individual documents, or we can consolidate them in together. But essentially, we're going to be considering what do people need to know, who are the key people, how do we actually build those relationships. As the project lifecycle goes on, we're going to move into the testing phase. If it's an ICT project, and you can be doing your SID, your integration testing, your UAT, user acceptance testing, etc., etc. At this particular point in time, this becomes, particularly during user acceptance testing or your testing phases, it's a really important time for the change activities that are going to be used to be tested, validated, explored, and really refining down to specifically whatever that change milestone that is going to hit implementation is going to be delivering. And then we get to the important part, the meaty part, which is that implementation phase, which would be typically your change milestone. But as I said, you can have multiple change milestones, or you could have multiple projects leading to a single change milestone. But realistically, we're getting to that point where the project has said, yep, whatever we've needed to build or deliver for the business, we've built the thing. from the change perspective, at this point in time, we're going to be going, hey, guys, are we ready? So we might be doing business readiness acceptance activities. We'll be making sure that our stakeholders are lined up, making sure that our leaders, have visibility on any of the risks or gaps or whatever it might be, that when this implementation occurs, that we've aligned the business behind that implementation and we've got the support of the personnel to be able to deliver it. And then the work focus kind of shifts a bit at this particular point in time, in that once the project has done their delivery, and talking typically ICT style projects in this context, essentially you move into early life cycle support, hypercare, whatever you want to call it. And typically the project runs that for a month or so. But realistically, they're scaling back their team, and it's transitioning whatever the service or capability is into the BAU environment, and you have a few key project people around just to make sure if anything goes wrong, that they can support it. But realistically, where they're at is, what's my next project? Where am I moving on to? So the PM, the BAs, the testers, etc., are going to be going, well, we're done. Congratulations, we've tossed it over the fence, and we're on to the next thing. Whereas from the change side of things, it's actually really important that you have a long tail on your change management plan to support and embed, and then properly close out with users. And this is another area where time and time again, people undercook the change activity. And basically what happens is you leave the business unsupported and you lose a whole raft of the benefits that you could have achieved as a result of the implementation. So like we said, with the scale and complexity at the beginning, making sure that you've got a good long tail on your project plan or your change plan to really embed and sustain the business is absolutely critical. Taylor, any thoughts on your previous experiences across GovERP, AgSmart, any number of the change initiatives you've worked on?
I think you've covered it, but I also think it's making sure that we have the support of the people, but making sure that people are actually ready for the change and making sure that the appropriate communications are there so they know that it's coming and what exactly is coming as well. And just making sure that we look at our change plan anytime those dependencies or project dependencies change, and making sure that's still in sync. So,
awesome, thanks, Tal. So sorry, I can't see the chat, but I'm assuming we don't have any questions that have popped in yet. No. So, moving on to building your change plan. So there's going to be a whole raft of activities that you need to consider around building out the change plan. What does that look like? And how do you pull it together? Again, when you're building the change plan, we're going to be reaching back to the information that we've already established through the previous sessions that we've run, and we will be forecasting or projecting forward, looking at the topics that we're going to cover over the next 3 weeks as well, around delivery of the change, embed the change, and reporting on the change. But realistically, we're sitting in this central phase here where we've done our kickoff, we've done our scale and complexity, we've got a bit of an understanding of our scope, we've potentially done a high-level change impact assessment, so we kind of know what we're dealing with. So we're going to move into this concept that we'll put together a change strategy. Now, the strategy to me is really always around, what do we think we need to do, and what are the levers that we're potentially going to need to pull. A plan, which would be the next stage, would be taking that strategy and time constraining it. So a plan to me is always a series of activities which are time constrained, whereas a strategy is a series of things that you would like to do, and you're exploring what are the important things to do in order to be successful. And there's a whole range of different activities that are going to, potentially fall in under your change strategy and change plan around your approach around leadership and sponsors. Again, can't stress enough how important leader-led change is, and making sure that our sponsors are present and available. How are we going to interact with our stakeholders? Do we have some difficult ones? Do we have some really proactive ones? How do we leverage the proactive ones in order to mobilise maybe the detractors? What are we going to do around strategic communications? What are the key milestones that we're going to link to, and what do those products look like? How are we aligning the organisation, and what is the training approach and training plan? So realistically, we're looking at all of those personal aspects to build out that change plan, and then we're going to run through those activities to deliver them. So what does that look like in practicality? Because there's a lot on that page, I know, for people looking at this, and I've just put together. I don't know what's happened to my key milestones there. I do apologise for that. But this is a bit of an example of a plan on a page. I'm a big fan of saying, if you want everybody on the same page, have one page. Hopefully a page that looks slightly better than this one, because the formatting has let me down significantly. But essentially what we would do, or what I always do, and I know Talia, you've done this on previous projects
multiple times, a plan on page is a good way to bring everyone together.
Yeah. Is you would start by looking at your milestones across the top. So what are the key project milestones? Invariably within any project, you will have things that slip or move around. What you want to do is you want to tie your key change activities to those milestones, so that your activities flex with the overall project schedule. Otherwise, you get yourself in a whole bunch of hot water, because there'll be things that you're dependent on that come out of the project that if they move and you don't automatically move with them, you'll be in a whole bunch of hot water, because people will be asking you to do things that you don't have the necessary information for. So that's sort of the concept. So we're running things down the page, and as these shift backwards and forwards, you're obviously able to move with them. And then we're looking at swim lanes. So who are your key stakeholder groups, or what are the key activities that you might need to deliver? Or if you're working in defence, they call them lines of effort. And then what are the activities that you need to have people organised in order to do? So, in this particular scenario, we've got a range of army stakeholders, industry stakeholders, etc., and we've got a range of industry events. So that would give you a little bit of an idea of, we've got a time scale. We've got some key things that we're hanging our activities on. And then as that project changes, you can obviously shift with them. So, Taylor, I know you've done this many times.
I have, yes. I was going to say our Sustainable Schools program really liked this plan on the page, and then we broke it down further after this and broke it into a communications approach, engagement approach, and the actual change activities. But they liked tying it together on this one page. Really, really worked well, and brought the whole team together so we could all see it and discuss it.
Yeah.
Even in GovARP, which was challenging, and there was lots of agencies and lots of different go live dates and lots of different hubs, it still worked well. I think it's a very good tool.
I kind of find the advantage of doing it this way is that people are really good at understanding the things they want to do.
Yeah.
And if you can just place them on a page in a logical order or sequence, then you can do your detailed planning underneath it. But just having this, overall concept, like I said, normally it would present a little bit better than this. I don't know what's happened.
Okay, we can forgive you.
Yeah. So, all right. So I will pause there if there's any questions, comments, etc. But we are actually approaching the end of today's session.
Short and sweet.
It's interesting. It's the shortest session we've run, but this is the one that takes. This is actually the
Longest part of the change.
is the hardest part of the
Yeah.
change as well, because what you're going to be doing is spending an incredible amount of time working with, stakeholders, working with project people, working with PMs and BAs and technical
Yeah,
people and
So much to go
business
into a planning
owners,
stage.
to pull all these people together. So it can be a bit of hard graft, but when you get it right, makes all the
Worth it.
difference. Yeah.
100%.
So look, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. We've actually finished up a little bit early. Hopefully you can join us next week for the delivering the change. So we'll talk through some more detail around strategies of what you need to do to deliver successfully, and what that might look like. But if there's nothing else, enjoy the rest of your day.